Hello and welcome to Monday's edition of Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, where for one final week before a summer break, we will be bringing you a daily adrenaline shot of political news into your brain at 7:30 in the morning.
My name is Sam Coates and with me is Jack Blanchard of Politico, and it's July the 22nd, 2.5 weeks into Keir Starmer's premiership and about a week and a half left of Parliament sitting. But to be honest, it's developments in the United States that are doing the heavy lifting for the news agenda right now.
You can say that again. Here in the UK this week, we're going to see a blizzard of speeches. We're going to see the odd policy announcement. In Parliament, we're going to have days more debates about the King's speech. They're doing economy and welfare today. They're doing health and immigration tomorrow. They're doing education on Wednesday. Although I suspect on Wednesday we'll be more interested in the first PMQs between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak since they swapped places in the House of Commons. And on welfare, we might be getting a vote on the two-child benefit cap if we see the Speaker select an amendment on that one day this week. So watch out for that as well.
Also this week, there's a slew of reports from the National Audit Office today and tomorrow, including one on HS2, which is always a painful read. The pay negotiations with the BMA, British Medical Association, about last year's pay start in earnest tomorrow. Big decisions on this year's pay awards looming, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And the Tories are finally due, or claim they're finally due, to decide their leadership contest timetable on or before Wednesday. But all of that is dwarfed by the massive news of this week and for many weeks to come, which is a different leadership contest on the other side of the Atlantic, which has to be today's top story, doesn't it, Jack?
Has the Tory leadership contest ever felt less relevant than it does right now? We have a much, much bigger leadership contest to talk about happening in America after Joe Biden stepped down last night, and that will be our top item today. Obviously, on domestic affairs, the second thing, Keir Starmer's speaking in Hampshire this morning. He's doing a big speech on skills and migration. Sorry, Keir, but you've been downgraded to the second item by America. That won't be the last time this year. I suspect that happens. But of course, a lot of the chatter really beyond small policy announcements is all about this big statement Rachel Reeves is going to make in the Commons next week, we think, telling us doom and gloom about the economy. Will we have 2 minutes at the end to talk about the Tories, Sam? What do you reckon?
If they deserve it, you'll have to wait and see.
Okay, let's start with America, who definitely deserves some conversation. Isn't this just the most amazing election campaign you've ever seen? There are still 3.5 months to go of this. We've already had the most extraordinary debate I've ever seen. We've had an assassination attempt on one of the candidates where he got clipped on the ear by a bullet. And now the president himself has stepped out of the race. Joe Biden issued a tweet at 6:46 p.m. UK time last night, basically a letter that he'd written saying why he was pulling out of the race. You probably knew that already. You've probably read it already if you're geeky enough to be listening to this podcast. But it really is an extraordinary moment in history. I don't think anything like this has ever really happened in a presidential race before, not so close to polling day. November the election is 3.5 months away almost exactly, and it just blows it wide open. Everyone is talking about Vice President Kamala Harris as the likely candidate, but it is not a done deal yet.
You just have to pause for a moment to reflect on the enormity of this moment. You have a presidential candidate conceding he is not fit to stand for re-election, despite saying the opposite for months and months and months. I do think how we got here, whilst not really a question for today because of the urgency of all the other things you said, but how we got here without the kind of battering that I could imagine somebody in a similar position if they were in the UK getting from the media, without more voices speaking up earlier in the political firmament. It is just amazing. And for there to have to be this emergency moment where Joe Biden gave his own inner circle 1 minute before pressing send on a message on X/Twitter, probably the most hostile platform to him since Elon Musk took it over that I can imagine. It all beggars belief and does scream of something quite fundamentally broken.
I think it's important to say here that what Joe Biden appears to have decided is not that he's not up to the job, but that he cannot win. That following that debate performance watched by so many millions of Americans, his path to victory is gone. And according to an excellent long read on our Politico website over in DC today, two of his closest aides came round on Saturday with the latest polling data and said, Mr. President, you can't win this now. People's minds have been made up. It was one of those moments in politics where everything shifts and you are done. And at that point, Joe Biden agreed that this race is so important, and it's so important in his mind that Donald Trump is not re-elected to the White House, that the best thing he could do is stand aside. Now, the really interesting question here that we immediately have to get onto is, can anyone else beat Donald Trump at this point? And Kamala Harris is the overwhelming favourite. She is currently the only person running. We saw several of the likely contenders to take her on. Various state governors around America endorsing her last night. We saw the Clintons endorsing her as well. Joe Biden himself, of course, has endorsed her. And as the vice president, she is the obvious person to take over the candidacy with just a few months to go. It's not nailed on, but it feels very, very, very likely that Kamala Harris is going to be the person going up against Donald Trump in November. Can she beat him? Polls don't look super promising for her, you have to say. She is not a wildly popular figure in America at all. Her vice presidency did not really take a light over the last 4 years, if you can put it that way. She's often mocked, she's often derided. She's said to be disliked by the public. The polling shows her pretty close to Trump in popularity, although a little bit behind. Obviously, that could change significantly if she does become the nominee. But crucially, she is not seen as popular in the swing states that you need to win if you want to win the White House if you're a Democrat. And that could be absolutely critical in this race. So, we know Donald Trump is not massively popular here in the UK for the large part. Every poll will tell you that. So there may be lots of people very excited by the announcement last night, thinking that now Biden's out of the way, the Democrats are going to come and swoop in and take the White House. I would say that is far from a done deal at this point, and this is very much up for grabs. And, Kamala Harris, lots of people like her, but definitely lots of people don't as well in the US.
It does look as if the Democratic bigwigs have decided that they're going to move fast to try and get everyone to coalesce around her. That apparently the Democrat Rules Committee will meet this morning to decide how they change the framework. But we also talk about what this means for the UK. Overnight, Keir Starmer issued some words basically welcoming or saying he respected President Biden's decision and said he looked forward to working with him for the remainder of the presidency and paid tribute to Joe Biden. I think in a matter of hours, we will get Keir Starmer being quizzed on this, and also what kind of relationship he might have with Vice President Kamala Harris if she ends up stepping up. Both of them similar ages, similar backgrounds as lawyers, faced similar criticism, in fact. Kamala Harris, just like Keir Starmer, when a chief prosecutor, coming under fire for being too hardline for the tastes and likes of some people on the left. So their legal records, both kind of not something that's entirely a sort of positive for some of those in their respective parties, but nevertheless, both probably on the sort of soft centre of their parties politically. So could there be stuff to bond over if she does end up in the White House? Well, we'll have to see. Do the two have any basis for a relationship? We will hear from Keir Starmer in a couple of hours on that. Just after 10 o'clock, I think he'll be pressed on exactly what this means for Britain and exactly what his hopes are for relationships with her. And the inevitability of it looking like this is edged in Donald Trump's direction in a short while.
I have to agree. It's a fair point. They're quite similar characters in some ways, quite similar in age as well as their sort of lawyerly backgrounds. But frankly, honestly, for anybody working in Westminster, I don't think they care that much who the Democrat nominee is. They just want to know whether they can beat Donald Trump or not, because there is a world in 2025 where Donald Trump is the president, and it is such a different world to the one where he is not that I can barely conceive, and therefore really I think there's only one question in town, and that is he going to win or not? And I don't think the Labour will care much who they're dealing with in the White House if it's a Democrat versus Donald Trump. The world will be a lot easier for them if it's a Democrat in the White House. I think that's probably safe to say.
Yes, worth noting just finally that Donald Trump's kind of slight slightly more moderate tone following the assassination attempt appeared to all but disappear overnight as he declared that Kamala Harris would be easier to beat as his principal opponent. Yes, let's turn to Keir Starmer's morning. He is giving a big speech on skills. It's really about two things. At the moment, around just under half of under 25-year-olds take up apprentices, but this number is falling. Labour long pledged to redirect some of the levy that's applied to businesses to change the way that apprenticeships work, to give businesses more skills that they need. Keir Starmer will make the argument that he made during the campaign in the lead up to the election, that doing this, training people in a way that's more focused to business, will allow businesses to rely more on homegrown skills rather than migration. He'll say all too often young people in our country have been let down, not been given access to the right opportunities or training in their community. And that is the thing that has meant an over-reliance on higher levels of migration. Clearly, this is one of his big interventions since becoming Prime Minister on migration. Do you think that businesses will welcome it and voters will buy it as an argument about migration?
Oh, I think they're barely listening, to be honest. I mean, is this going to cut through? What's really being announced here appears to be a new quango, isn't it? We're getting something called Skills England, which is going to lead on this policy, and it all feels very, Gordon Brown era, doesn't it? We've got a problem here, quick, set up a quango and they'll see if they can do it. Skills England, it really does sound like something from the old New Labour state, and I think that these things just take time. It's a very Starmerite approach to things. It's not going to grab massive headlines. I had to scroll so far down the BBC website to find this story this morning to see how it was being covered under all the American news. I don't think it's really going to make a ripple. But Keir Starmer will say if we get to 2029, when he is seeking re-election, presumably, and there has been an improvement and the economy is working better because we have more of the skilled people we need, and that has made an impact on the migration figures, then he will get the credit for it. And who knows, maybe he's right. This sort of managerial, institutional approach to leadership, it's like the exact opposite of what we saw under Boris Johnson. Whether it will be effective in winning round businesses and voters, I have no idea. I think it really needs to work, and I think that sort of thing takes an awful lot of time and probably won't we won't learn very much about it today.
If there is a thing in the politics of the new Labour government that people are watching, it's actually the event next week, quite possibly on Tuesday, where Rachel Reeves is going to unveil just how bad a state the public finances are in, left behind by Labour. What that means in practice, and this is pretty contested by the Tories, but what this means in practice is she and Pat McFadden, her Cabinet Office colleague, have been writing to all members of the Cabinet to say, look, are there any hidden nasties that haven't yet been disclosed by or aren't in the numbers at the moment that are going to mean that there's a black hole by the time. Oh, that crashing is my daughter just doing her toast, by the way. That means because real life has to continue. It is a school day. Because there are all sorts of things they will claim that the Tory government have left behind for the next Labour budget to pay for. Top of that list is public sector pay deals. Now, it was reported in Saturday's Times by Stephen Swinford that the public sector pay bodies were going to recommend about 5.5% increase for the 500,000 teachers and 1.3 million NHS staff, which is a whole 3 percentage points higher than the government has budgeted for, leaving a black hole of between 8 to 10 billion pounds. And then at the weekend, speaking on the BBC, Rachel Reeves seemed to indicate that she was prepared to give, if not the whole 5.5%, then something substantially higher than inflation, which is hovering around 2% at the moment. In other words, she will splash the cash at this early stage in her time in the Treasury, which is tricky given all of the different constraints that she's put on herself, and does point to the idea that there will have to be some forms of tax rises come October when there's the budget in order to pay for it. So it's a pretty big moment, Labour gearing up and getting themselves in position to massively blame the Tories for doing the thing that they said they had no plans to do in the election campaign, which is to push up taxes.
I love that we're getting live breakfast updates through this. This is truly an early morning podcast.
The toast is hot, the Nutella is prime.
There we go. It's all going off. I think that Rachel Reeves' speech next week is going to be a really big moment. This is the moment that Labour have been planning for months. I suspect that when they get in, they were going to, just before we all break up for the summer holidays, they're going to pin everything on the Tories. And she's going to claim that they've discovered all of these terrible things that they had no idea about when they were in opposition. But now they've come into government and looked under the hood. Here it is. This is just how bad it really is. It's kind of a bit tenuous, honestly. I mean, I was watching her on the Laura Kuenssberg show yesterday, claiming that nobody could have known that the prisons crisis was as bad as it was as we found it when we got in. Nobody was saying that. Yeah, they were. They totally were. The figures come out every week. We could totally see how full the prisons were. Read reports by the Howard League for penal reform. It was there in black and white. It was in every prison inspection report. We totally knew how bad the prisons were. It's just that nobody in the media likes to talk and write about how terrible prisons are because generally people aren't that interested. And yet they come in and suddenly there's this crisis that needs fixing. We all knew.
Can I slightly disagree there? Because it's one thing to know about these crises, but often the debate doesn't get quite as far down and as techie as the way our public finances system worked. But until the numbers appear, sort of verified numbers appear in a budget or an autumn statement, they don't, as it were, in public finance terms, become real. Let me give you another example. If public sector pay is one massive problem for the government, another one is all of these compensation schemes. Now, all the compensation schemes, you're right, we've talked about for months, but the previous government quite skillfully stopped them appearing as they must in a budget or autumn statement until the first one after Labour took over. And so at that moment, you have to find a way to pay for it in a way that in the last budget, when the Tories offered multiple tax rises, multiple tax cuts, they didn't. And so it's one thing to know about a problem, but it doesn't become real if you're Chancellor until you're forced to confront it in a budget. And that is the thing that the Tories have left behind for Labour. So it's not that we didn't know about the problems. It's that the, as it were, on the balance sheet, they hadn't yet crystallised or appeared. And each one of these on Sue Gray's shit list, whether it's prisons, whether it's public sector pay, whether it's compensation schemes for everything from Horizon to contaminated blood, just haven't become real in public finances terms. And that's the issue that Labour do have to deal with.
All right, more generous than me there towards Rachel Reeves. Let's do what we got. 90 seconds on the Tories, Sam. What we're going to say, that we were expecting an announcement on this leadership contest last week. It didn't come because they're still arguing about how long or short it should be. The current expectation, unless you're going to tell me otherwise, is that we should learn the answer on Wednesday. We were expecting the 1922 committee to meet that day and finally decide exactly what the rules and, more importantly, the timetable for this leadership contest actually are. In the meantime, we are getting sort of semi-soft launches from the contenders. Nobody's actually come out and announced they're running yet, but they're all dancing around it, quietly gathering up supporters in the background. They all need MPs on side to get into the final two, and so there's lots of furtive drinks meetings and WhatsApp messages and phone calls going on in the background, but nobody's actually had the courage to go over the top yet, but I assume that they will start to do so this week.
Some hints it may come before Wednesday. Some of my colleagues were being told the Tories are trying to look like a professional on-it outfit and get the news out before the last possible moment. But no, we will see. One prominent Tory said to me that they weren't engaging in this leadership contest because it isn't this leadership contest that matters or provide a candidate that takes the Tory party through to the next election. It's the next Tory leadership candidate. They don't think whoever gets elected is going to last, let's
Two
see.
other things just to watch out for today. It's the Farnborough International Air Show, which lots of senior ministers go to. It sounds like a cuddly village show. In fact, it's a massive arms fair.
I'm off there in a few seconds' time. A taxi is going to take me in 5 minutes to Farnborough.
Brilliant. Are you going to buy a fighter jet?
Yes.
There you go. Excellent. It's the nominations for the Deputy Speaker contest today in the House of Commons. Lots of people will be watching that. And also, as I mentioned at the start, the other thing to keep your eye on this week is during the King's Speech, debates which are going on for much of the week. Will the Commons Speaker Lindsay Hoyle pick one of the amendments that have been put down to the King's Speech, calling for an end for the two-child benefit cap, which of course is a policy which is causing Labour Party all sorts of problems? And were he to do that today or tomorrow or Wednesday, that would be a problem for Keir Starmer, because it would be a test of his whipping operation and his leadership to see whether he could convince his MPs not to vote against it. Not that he would lose the vote, but it would at least be the first rebellion of his premiership. So one to keep an eye on if, and that's an if, the Commons Speaker decided to select one of those amendments.
There are 19 Labour MPs that have signed up to an amendment for that. So if that means that there are only 19 troublesome Labour MPs out of 411, I think Keir Starmer will be pretty pleased at that. Let's wrap it up. Breakfast has been made. The taxi is arriving. I better go. You better go. See you tomorrow.
Have fun at the air show. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.